Creative babble.
Love, exciting and new.
Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever.
It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships at Bermudan and British Registry.
Lowe's knows how to help you get the most out of your store run. That's why members save more with MyLowe's Rewards. Earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases. Get access to member-only deals and free member gifts. Plus, unlock free standard shipping when you reach Silver Key status. So what are you waiting for? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
Imagine getting the news that you have cancer. And I'm not talking about just any cancer. I'm talking about stage 4 lung cancer. Stage 4 lung cancer is one of the most aggressive and deadly cancer diagnoses. It means that the cancer has spread to other organs, such as the brain, bones, or liver. One of the first questions on your mind is, how long have I got? Scott Warwick of Helena, Montana must have asked himself this question every single day. A study found that patients with stage 4 lung cancer who chose not to undergo any treatment had a much shorter life expectancy, just about over 16 months on average. But for those who opted for radiation, chemotherapy, or targeted therapies, that number jumped to 2 years. But Scott Warwick refused to follow the script. 2 years into his treatment, he was still going strong, reportedly running 5 miles per day. Then 4 years passed, and he was still here. Against all odds, he hit his 10-year mark battling stage 4 lung cancer and undergoing relentless chemotherapy. Scott was still holding on strong. But eventually, on year 11, Scott Warwick's time was running out. On August 2nd, 2020, he was admitted into the ICU at St. Peter's Hospital in Helena, Montana. Here's Dr. Randy Sasich.
On this day, one of the hospitalists comes up to me and tells me about a 52-year-old man who had been diagnosed 11 years ago with metastatic lung cancer. He came in for pulmonary infiltration and hypoxemia. So what this was a 51-year-old man with a diagnosis of the most common form of lung cancer, diagnosed at stage 4, meaning this is a non-curable diagnosis. 11 years ago, also at a young age, he was diagnosed, who's still alive, currently on chemotherapy.
Dr. Sasich, who oversaw St. Peter's intensive care unit, first met Scott Warwick the day after he was admitted for shortness of breath.
His lungs on the x-ray were insulted. They were filling up with something. They were white when they should have been black. And his oxygen was low and he's struggling to breathe.
Dr. Sasich concluded that this was the result of 11 years of cancer treatment and chemotherapy.
That doesn't make any sense. That's impossible. It's not impossible. It's just really unlikely, like beyond unlikely, that somebody has lived 11 years with that diagnosis.
Survival rates for stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer beyond 10 years are exceptionally low. A study published in Frontier in Oncology reported that patients who survived at least 3 months post-diagnosis, the 10-year survival rate was approximately 5%. 5% is like getting struck by lightning twice in your lifetime. The more Dr. Sasich looked into Scott Warwick's medical history, the less answers he found.
And as I look back through the records, there wasn't a biopsy that was there for cancer. There wasn't.
No biopsy, no signs of cancer. Yet, Scott Warwick received 11 years of chemotherapy and other treatments. A toxic cocktail that blazes through his body. Chemo doesn't just attack the cancer, by the way. It destroys everything in its path. Your immune system, your digestive tract, your quality of life. It's like setting fire to a field of weeds and hoping that the grass grows back. Some days chemo feels like it's slowly killing you, and other days it's the only thing keeping you alive. But Scott Warwick didn't have cancer, yet his oncologist, Dr. Thomas Weiner, ordered chemo for him anyway. What if your doctor wasn't trying to save you, but trying to cash in on you? According to allegations, Dr. Thomas Weiner ordered brutal rounds of chemotherapy for patients in Montana who may not have even had cancer. Why? Well, some claim that financial incentives played a role. In today's episode, we dig into the accusations about the system that allows doctors to profit from unnecessary treatments, and the real patients who pay the ultimate price. I'm Javier Leiva, and this is Pretend. Stories about real people pretending to be someone else.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai-iced coffee-flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Tell me about your medical background. Like, what's your specialty?
I'm a pulmonary critical care specialist. I'm not going back to medicine in the US. I like medicine. I enjoy medicine. I think I'm good at it in my specialty. After what I've seen and experienced even after this, I turned your short question into a long answer.
Today, we're telling the story of the case that broke Dr. Randy Sasich. He took a stand against Dr. Weiner, questioning what he believed to be medical fraud. But speaking out came at a cost. Almost immediately, Dr. Sasich felt the pressure, pushback from his colleagues, a growing sense of fear. The moment he started asking questions, everything changed. Were there any, lab reports or any evidence of cancer?
You don't treat cancer without a diagnosis of cancer, and that means the labs from pathology.
Dr. Sasich searched, but in the previous 10 years, there was no biopsy proving that Scott Warwick had cancer. So then why was Dr. Weiner, Scott's oncologist, treating him with years of aggressive chemotherapy? Dr. Sasich kept digging through the records, searching for answers. Then he asked Scott Warwick to explain when he first got the diagnosis.
So what Scott Warwick had was, and he told me he had a nodule kind of grow up, and he kind of pointed right here.
Dr. Sasich points to the side of his neck.
None of this looked like cancer, but he had an ear, nose, and throat physician biopsy it, and that came back with atypical cells. Atypical cells in a nodule that grows up can be all sorts of stuff. Usually it means the cells are dying because they're outpacing their blood supply. And that can be cancer, but doesn't have to be cancer. And in Scott's case, it wasn't cancer.
You have this wild case that could be part of a medical anomaly book, right? Like 11 years with stage 4 cancer, something your spidey sense started going off. You don't have a biopsy.
You don't need a spidey sense for this one. You don't. It's that, I use the word egregious. It's that obvious that something horrible had happened here.
I mean, I'm not even a doctor, and that just sounds... When I hear stage 4, I hear a clock ticking.
Yes, yeah. And in fact, I still remember Scott's PET scan when I first looked at it first morning, when he first told me about it, because that's what the first thing I did. I was look through the pathology and look through the imaging to see if this made any sense. And it didn't. Cancers, a lot of cancers will light up. Other things, infections, other things will light up. Scott had it all over in his nasopharynx, lighting up, very bright. And what Weiner would have had to, what Weiner was saying was this was all metastatic lung cancer. There was no obvious tumor. There was one nodule in his lung. It just doesn't look like lung cancer. And if it were, this man had months or weeks to live.
And now you're kind of coming to this conclusion that something's terribly wrong. And I'm assuming that you're working with Scott and his wife and the family. And at any point, did you tell them about some of your concerns?
I'd had to give patients in an outpatient setting when I'd taken over a case. I don't agree with your previous physician's diagnosis. I've navigated that before.
Yeah.
That's unpleasant. It's really unsettling to a patient, as you can imagine. To go to an expert and have them say that, your new expert who you barely know says that their previous doctor they knew is wrong. Now I knew I was going to have to do this to a man who was dying in an ICU with a diagnosis he's lived with for 11 years. It had taken his job. It had massively affected his family life. And it was all unnecessary.
You've lived 11 years of your life thinking that you're dying, and now somebody's telling me that, well, you might be dying, but it's not because of the cancer.
Even worse, I would say, you're dying unnecessarily for the treatment of a cancer that never existed. The nausea, the loss of your job, you're living day to day thinking that you've got months at any time it's going to come back. That was all an illusion. All of it.
And did he believe you?
No, he didn't. First thing he did was call his wife and tell his wife I'm an idiot, which is the most appropriate response. That's the only sane response that Scott Warwick could have had. But I remember telling him, when somebody's that sick and that short of breath, they all have the same kind of 1,000-yard stare. They're concentrating on breathing. But I remember the look of disbelief in his eyes. The room was dark, and I could tell he didn't believe me. But I wanted him to hang on. So when I talked to his wife, Lisa, it was maybe the day after, it was the same thing. Like, I know sounds crazy, but, I don't think he may not have cancer, I think is what I said. I don't think he does. He could get over this insult. He could be healthy again. Like, please don't give up. I'm pausing again because unfortunately I did, all of us, still emotional for me. All of us have choices we've made if we're doing this right, for treatment, to not to treat, that we'd like to have back.
So here you have this Western-like duel between these two doctors. Dr. Sasich is convinced that Scott Warwick does not have cancer. And Dr. Weiner, the rock star oncologist, is sticking to his diagnosis. Eventually, Scott Warwick stopped his chemotherapy treatment. And Dr. Sasich encouraged Scott to get a lung biopsy and test to assess the damage from all that chemo.
The correct approach is to make sure you don't have an infection first, and then to biopsy, to get a piece of the lung to see if that's consistent with damage from a chemotherapy agent, from gemcitabine. And that's what we did.
When Dr. Weiner found out about the biopsy, he noted in Scott Warwick's file, quote, Dr. Sasich is still skeptical of the diagnosis, unquote. The test came back and showed that Scott Warwick had a fungal infection in his lungs, an infection likely caused due to the damage from the chemotherapy.
It came back with this fungus called PJP pneumocystis. I gave him an antibiotic called Bactrim, which is the treatment for this. Mm-hmm. And he developed a horrible reaction to this called Steven Johnson's. And basically it's a drug reaction. He got home on 4 liters of oxygen, came back in a week, again, short of breath. And I didn't know he'd come back. I was in clinic, and one of the ICU nurses called me, and she said, something funny's happening with his skin. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but I immediately left the clinic after the patient, crossed the street, went in there, and saw his skin coming off from where the tape was on to hold his something in place on there. His skin was kind of tearing away. And I knew immediately what it was. I saw this happen early in my training. And it can affect your lungs too. Your eyes, you can go blind, your mouth, your skin. He got sent to a burn unit. That's where you have to send these patients. I intubated him, I put him on a breathing machine, and we put him on a helicopter to University of Utah because he didn't have a burn unit. And then he died 2 weeks later.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Zysol is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Zysol keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all. Take Zysol. At night.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024, ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
According to a study published in the Journal of Global Oncology, most oncologists see between 15 to 25 patients a day, depending on where they practice. Even in low-resource settings like rural hospitals, only about 20% of doctors handle more than 50 patients in a single day. But Dr. Weiner's numbers tell a completely different story. One estimate suggests that he saw 250 patients a year, an average of 40 patients a day. And in an interview with ProPublica, Dr. Weiner himself bragged about billing for as many as 70 patients in a single day. 70 patients, that's 70 in one day. At that pace, how much time could he have really spent on each patient? And how thorough were those diagnoses? Scott Warwick was just one of thousands of patients treated by Dr. Thomas Weiner.
And I'll say it here honestly, I think the intent was to kill Scott Warwick. I do. Is this man that incompetent and dumb? Or is there something malicious going on? And it's an impossible choice to make between those two.
I can't think of a third option.
There isn't one, and the hospital's in the same boat. Are you that incompetent or are you complicit? There really isn't another choice here.
How did this flurry of treatment get past the hospital administrators? How did this fly under the radar of insurance companies? To answer that question, we have to look at the possible motivations. What could possibly make a doctor diagnose a patient with a fatal disease that he doesn't even have? The most logical answer is money. In the U.S. healthcare systems, doctors and hospitals are financially rewarded based on the volume, not necessarily the patient's outcome. The more the doctor bills for visits, tests, and treatments, the more revenue they generate. This system, driven by a fee-for-service billing, creates this perverse incentive that can lead to misdiagnosis, overtreatment, and even unnecessary procedures. A doctor who sees 10 patients a day earns significantly less than one who rushes through 40. And a patient with a complex or chronic illness, whether real or exaggerated, becomes a steady revenue stream for both the doctor and the hospital. An oncologist who prescribes chemotherapy, even when unnecessary, earns thousands of dollars per patient. Doctors like Thomas Weiner, who allegedly ordered chemotherapy for patients who didn't even have cancer, exposed just how easily the system can be exploited. When I first learned about the story, I found multiple doctors accused of similar medical schemes. Dr. Weiner was just one example. Let's take Dr. Jorge Zamora-Quezada, a Texas rheumatologist who falsely diagnosed hundreds of patients with rheumatoid arthritis and prescribed them dangerous lifelong treatments that they didn't even need. He billed $325 million in fraudulent claims. Patients suffered severe side effects while insurance companies unknowingly funneled millions of dollars into his practice. He was convicted of healthcare fraud and money laundering. about Dr. Rosen, a dermatologist, who told thousands of patients that they had skin cancer and performed completely unnecessary surgeries. It's reported that he diagnosed cancer on every single patient who came through his office, and almost always performed some kind of skin surgery. And then there's Dr. Solomon Melgen of Florida. He robbed Medicare blind by giving patients unnecessary painful eye injections and falsifying diagnosis of macular degeneration. Some patients lost their vision permanently due to these unnecessary treatments. He was sentenced to 17 years in prison for fraud.
President Donald Trump commuted the sentence of a Florida eye doctor convicted of defrauding Medicare out of $73 million.
And these are just a few examples of how the medical system enables this kind of fraud. The list goes on and on. But let's get back to Dr. Thomas Weiner from Helena, Montana, because this case is unraveling in real time as we speak. Dr. Weiner's record-shattering billing made him the highest-paid employee at St. Peter's Hospital. A 2010 tax filing shows that Dr. Weiner earned almost $1.3 million that year. The most he has ever been paid in a single year was $1.8 million. Let's just put it this way. The hospital CEO made only $500,000. Here's an audio clip from a 2021 deposition. Investigators asked Dr. Weiner about his salary.
I'm looking under compensation. Reflects your base salary was $1,847,456. Did I read that accurately?
That's at this time in 2019.
Was that the highest base salary you had in your time at St. Peter's Health?
I don't remember.
What was your base salary then at the time of your departure?
I think it was 1.5, somewhere around that. I don't know the exact, but roughly.
He can't remember how many millions of dollars he was getting paid. I mean, just to put things into perspective, Dr. Thomas Weiner made $1.5 million a year as an oncologist at a nonprofit hospital with fewer than 100 beds. That's nearly double the salary of a neurosurgeon, one of the highest paid doctors in medicine. During the time period that Dr. Weiner treated Scott Warwick, Dr. Weiner reportedly raked in almost $20 million. Investigators asked him why his salary was reduced.
Well, in the end of March 2020, Wade Johnson,
that's the new CEO of St. Peter's Hospital,
came to me and said that we either need to cut your salary or get rid of you and hire 3 other oncologists. And either basically accept it or leave.
But Dr. Thomas Weiner didn't leave. As his astronomical salary grew more and more attention, Dr. Weiner decided to push back. He and a few other staff members staged a rebellion. According to the independent record out of Montana, an overwhelming number of St. Peter's medical staff signed the no-confidence vote against the hospital administration, citing that they care more about the finances than they do about the quality of care delivered. Kind of ironic, right? According to ProPublica, Dr. Weiner repeatedly threatened to sue or resign, leaving St. Peter's Hospital without an oncologist. In an interview with ProPublica, Weiner said that without him, St. Peter had no cancer center. That is a lot of power for one doctor. So why didn't St. Peter's just hire a second oncologist? The current CEO of St. Peter's Hospital hired a consultant to review Weiner's salary. And they concluded that hiring additional physicians could decrease Dr. Weiner's production, effectively lowering his pay. You see, doctors like Thomas Weiner don't get paid a flat salary. They earn based on RVUs, or relative value units, a system that rewards doctors for seeing more patients and ordering more treatments. The more procedures he bills, the more money he makes, giving him every incentive to keep the chemo flowing. But all of this came to a head when Dr. Randy Sasich blew the whistle on Dr. Weiner. Sasich's discovery that Scott Warwick received 11 years of cancer treatment without any evidence of cancer was just too hard to ignore. So you filed this complaint against Dr. Weiner, and what was his response?
So that's what I did, was went through peer review. I later found out that this had been going on for years. They wanted him gone quietly so he can go do this someplace else, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Weiner didn't react. Not to me, anyway. He was too powerful. I was a traveling physician and of no consequence. He did send a text to the hospital president that said, FYI, I found the FYI part funny. FYI, put a muzzle on Sasich or else. Weiner's reaction was, well, I mean, it's comic book villain. FYI.
It sounds like a mafia, like a mob boss putting a hit on somebody, right?
I mean, there's another quote in there that I think the journalist got that it was, Weiner called it an inside joke where he told somebody, give him the drug he ordered or rip their lips off. This doesn't happen in hospitals anymore. It happened right before I started training when physicians were treated like gods. You could act like a 4-year-old in an operating room and throw scalpels and nothing would happen to you. That doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's shocking that you can threaten a colleague in the 21st century in an American hospital and just go about your business. That floored me as much as anything. That there's a literal fact with him writing, give me what I want or I'll rip your lips off, and texting the president, put a muzzle on somebody. He was
wild.
He was that powerful and he knew it.
I just don't know how this goes unnoticed. Well, it turns out that other physicians were paying attention, like Dr. Robert Leclerc. They just weren't as vocal as Dr. Sasich. When asked why he didn't say anything, Dr. Leclerc told ProPublica that he was just caught up in the culture. Dr. Leclerc may not have spoken out, but he was secretly documenting his concerns.
This was actually not meeting standard of care. And I can't emphasize enough how important that term is.
Standard of care?
Yeah, if you don't meet standard of care, that's very serious. And that was all in the medical record. That doesn't need to be deemed from anything else. The medical director is the story.
An independent review conducted by the University of Utah noted an incident involving a 62-year-old patient of Dr. Weiner, who was being treated for throat cancer. The reviewers noted that there was no biopsy confirming the diagnosis, and that providing cancer treatment without confirming a biopsy is extremely problematic and does not rise to the level of standard care. And they even went as far as calling it malpractice. So here we have a second patient who received treatment with no biopsy, or any proof that the patient had cancer. A third patient was receiving chemotherapy for breast cancer, and even underwent a mastectomy. After the procedure and a follow-up visit, Dr. Weiner noted in her chart that there is, quote, no evidence of recurrence, unquote. But records show that Dr. Weiner didn't even conduct a simple breast examination. Since he skipped that physical exam, the tumor, which went undetected for months, returned. It took the patient to notice the lump herself. There's also the mysterious death of a 16-year-old girl who suddenly died under Dr. Weiner's care. Dr. Sasich recalled hearing that Dr. Weiner was frustrated that another doctor had been treating her. And once Dr. Weiner took over, unfortunately, she didn't live much longer. In a 2019 text exchange, the hospital's chief nurse suggested sending all of the hospital's end-of-life patients to oncology, even though these were not cancer patients. She added, quote, I just feel like those nurses do it best, unquote. Dr. Weiner welcomed that suggestion and responded, I agree.
He responds with a text with 2 exclamation points on the end, which is just chilling. He was excited to have that. It's just so chilling.
How many people do you think lost their lives?
The records are so poor. So we've got 24 years with a guy who's shown what he does, who's nobody's watching, or the people that are watching are controlled by him. So the answer's not dozens. The answer's scores, maybe hundreds.
God only knows.
Injuries, thousands.
Right.
There's not a case I looked into that I saw with Weiner. I saw one where he did the correct thing. It was that bad. And it was a blind squirrel getting a nut. He's that bad. Weiner decided to end these people's lives. And in some cases, we know he was changing code statuses without them knowing about it or being involved in the discussion, which is just that the hospital knew he was doing this and didn't remove him immediately is unconscionable.
Under immense pressure and scrutiny, St. Peter's Hospital suspended Dr. Weiner. The news of his departure caused quite a reaction, but not the kind of reaction that you would expect.
Here we are, standing for Dr. Weiner. Go Team Weiner. Go Team Weiner. Whoop, whoop.
Dozens of supporters lined the streets waving posters in support for the fallen oncologist. One sign read, "Dr. Weiner saved my life." Justice for Dr. Weiner.
There's one doctor, Dr. Tom Weiner, who needs our support. His patients in this community have supported him, but what he has done for our community is outstanding.
I'm really, really upset. I'm going to cry because Dr. Weiner saved my life and was an amazing, amazing man for me and my family. He's an amazing physician and a very amazing caretaker. I'll be writing letters, and I'm really, really disappointed in St. Peter's.
Supporters even raised money for a billboard that read, "We stand with Dr. Weiner." His supporters are composed of former patients, people in the community, but most importantly, his team of nurses. ProPublica reported that from 2005 to 2020, Dr. Weiner showered his staff with bonuses and jewelry, spending up to $140,000 of his own money. Some nurses even got $1,500 diamond solitaire earrings. From the sound of it, he treated his team well, and since the accusations came out, they're returning the favor.
Here we are, protesting again against St. Pete's for letting go of our cancer doc. We're not going away, Wade, like you thought we would by Christmas. We're still here.
His supporters even stood up a We Stand with Dr. Tom Weiner Facebook group. And that leads me to my next question, which is the part that blows my mind, is his fanatical supporters. The billboards, the Facebook groups, this cult-like following that he has. How do you explain that?
It's a great question, and I have been thinking about this so much. Cult's the right descriptor, but these are victims. These are victims. There were times when I was angry at them. They put my name on signs. I'm still afraid of them. Mm-hmm. It is a cult headed by a wealthy, murderous physician with an anger problem. Yeah, I'm scared of him. You've got Weiner and some people closely around him, family members, and two of them made a float during Christmas, a We Stand with Weiner. And they dressed up as Joseph and Mary. And there was a cradle there, and it was in the Weiner support purple. They chose purple for the ribbons. I assume that in the cradle was supposed to be the baby Jesus, but I'm not sure. That's the extent this goes. There was stuff on Facebook pages talking about him, the greatest oncologist in the world, comparing him to Jesus. It's a cult. And they're victims of somebody they're supposed to trust in possibly the most vulnerable, scary moment of their lives. And this man tortured them for money.
On November 17th, 2020, St. Peter's Hospital fired Dr. Weiner. Days later, Weiner sued the hospital for wrongful termination and defamation. He also sued Dr. Randy Sasich.
I still have 2 lawsuits against me. I have a case in the First District Court where I'm still being sued for slander.
By Weiner?
By Weiner. And it also got separated out to where I'm also a defendant, an appellee is the word, at the Montana Supreme Court for all the other charges, civil conspiracy and everything else. But yeah, it was designed to shut me up and intimidate me the whole way.
Yeah, and he has the money to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine how much money that guy has? After Weiner was fired from St. Peter's Hospital, more problems floated to the surface. Dozens of patients wanted to get refills for painkillers. I'm talking about oxycodone, morphine, and other opioids. But here's the problem. The hospital couldn't find any prescriptions for these patients. According to court testimonies, Dr. Weiner was writing all these prescriptions by hand. Some of these patients didn't even have cancer, or any medical reason why they would need these drugs. Dr. Weiner denies these allegations.
This is an ad from BetterHelp Online Therapy. We always hear about the red flags to avoid in relationships, but it's just as important to focus on the green flags. If you're not quite sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify those qualities so you can embody the green flag energy and find it in others. BetterHelp offers therapy 100% online, and sign-up only takes a few minutes. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
Sharon Dibble was 75 years old, battling kidney failure and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, two conditions that already make breathing difficult. But on March 6, 2018, for reasons unclear to medical reviewers, Dr. Weiner doubled her extended-release morphine from 30 to 60 milligrams twice a day, on top of her oxycodone regimen. 4 days later, her daughter found her limp, blue in the face, and not breathing. Paramedics rushed her to St. Peter's, where she was placed on life support. But the damage was done. More than 2 weeks in the hospital, Sharon Dibble never woke up. For a woman with failing kidney and lung disease, that much morphine was a death sentence. To make matters worse, Dr. Weiner is also accused of changing patient code status without their permission. For example, if a patient elects to be intubated in order to keep breathing, Dr. Weiner would change their status to do not resuscitate or do not intubate according to court documents. All this without the patient's consent.
There were pieces of meat where if there was enough written down, he'd give them chemotherapy. It was that bad.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to Scott. Over 11 years, the man was tortured, and then killed.
I would never have known about this case if it wasn't for the incredible reporting by David McSwain at ProPublica. His article, Eat What You Kill, which I will link in the show notes, dives deep into the Dr. Weiner controversy. The title, Eat What You Kill, itself comes from a quote by Dr. Weiner, who describes how the more patients a doctor treats, the more money they make. In other words, eat what you kill. The article is titled very appropriately, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's who says that to a reporter? You're treating cancer patient. Eat what you kill? What's wrong with you? I mean, something horrible's wrong with you, but...
That is very telling of his worldview, right? Or the way he approaches medicine.
Yeah, he's surrounded by people who would never question him. He set it up this way. And he doesn't know how monstrous what he's done and what he says. He doesn't see it. ProPublica deserves massive accolades for not only the story I'm involved with, but for that week of stories where they just laid it out. Right. We live in a broken healthcare system, period, yep. Full stop.
Yep. In the age that we're in right now where the media is being villainized and attacked, I mean, we need the ProPublicas. We can't let ProPublica be cowered down to some sort of lawsuit.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think as we go forward, that a non-corporate media that gets its money, it doesn't have shareholders it has to answer to. It's decentralized and it's full of a bunch of people who are investigative journalists. I think they're going to be the last thing standing out here for major media.
This past August, St. Peter's Hospital reached a $10.8 million settlement with the U.S. Attorney for the District of Montana for submitting false claims for services performed by Dr. Weiner. And as of this recording, no criminal charges have been filed. Next time on Pretend, you're going to hear from a patient who had 3 years of cancer treatment for cancer that she never even had. This is a story about another doctor in a completely different part of the country.
You can't give someone who's healthy medications they don't need for 3 years and not have a repercussion.
That's next time on Pretend. Today's episode was written by me, Javier Leiva, and it was edited by the talented Puna Shenoy with the Podcast Pundits. If you want to listen to part 2, Subscribe to Patreon or Pretend Plus on Apple Podcasts. And make sure to follow us on social media at PretendPod. I'd love to hear what you think about this story, so shoot me a message. And remember, the best way to support this podcast is to tell a friend to listen or leave a review. I appreciate all of you. We'll be back next week. Talk to you soon.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
Creative Babble.